In Formula One, every system is trusted until the moment it isn't.
My screen has gone black.
Understood. We need you to push.
A blackout in the cockpit, interference across the radio. The question is always the same. Was it just a failure, or was it foul play?
Multiple teams reporting electrical interference today.
In the heat of a race, even a flickering screen can feel like a targeted attack. The driver is the ultimate end user. The car is now a rolling network of devices. One digital fault can be as costly as a broken gearbox.
We need you to retire the car. Understood.
I'm Callum Nicholas, and this is Securing the Win, where we uncover the hidden stories in Formula One and with one password, take you inside one of the sport's most secure organisations. As a mechanic, I helped build Max Verstappen's championship-winning cars. And now, as an Oracle Red Bull Racing ambassador, I'm bringing you the unheard stories that defined championships. Today, I get to welcome the Group Head of End User Experience for all of the things that we do here at Oracle Red Bull Racing. He's responsible for every login, every device, and all the workflows across the organisation. So firstly, Nim, thank you so much for joining us. I know you've obviously got a ton going on, but we really value the insight of you joining us here on the Securing the Win podcast. So thank you very much.
No problem. Yeah, pleasure to be here.
You are the person responsible for so much of the infrastructure we use across the organisation. I guess my first question for you is, can you simplify in, terms that I can understand, someone who's all about nuts and bolts, what it actually means to, implement technology and manage the user experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So my role, essentially, I have 3 different teams that report into me that look after sort of the service side. And they're basically looking after the different business entities within the sort of Red Bull Technology Group. And then in addition to that, I have a modern workplace team. And what that means is we basically support the whole business. We look after all the services delivered to the organisation. So that could be anything from like printing to VPN access to Microsoft Teams calls. We then also look after the whole Microsoft 365 ecosystem and kind of the user identity. And all of this basically feeds into sort of securing the whole sort of ecosystem, yeah. In addition to that, I look after all the clients in the organisation. So when I look after them, we basically look after all the policies, we look after all the endpoint controls, and basically we have to secure them, but equally we need to make sure they work for the users. So it's actually quite a fine balance in sort of, in making sure it's a secure client, but also it fits for its purpose in terms of the end users and what they're using it for.
Absolutely, and as you say, you've had these policies and this suite of tools. Now, you've been at Oracle Red Bull Racing for the best part of 20 years, right? Pretty much since day one. So that suite of tools and those policies, they must have evolved quite a long way throughout your tenure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I first joined, I think it was like 250 people, 2 buildings, and everything was quite simple. And I thought, how complicated can Formula One get? Boy, how wrong was I? Fast forward to where we are now, sort of 1,800 plus users, I think 10 buildings, maybe more than that. We've got the cloud, and it's really complicated. And it's quite a challenging responsibility to manage all of that. I think back in the day, you kind of knew what was going on, you knew people, you understood the processes, and it was manageable. But as we've expanded, we're now an enterprise organization. And with that, we need enterprise tools. So what we're finding is that, we're now, rather than being reactive, sort of keeping the lights on the systems, it's more proactive and actually pushing the boundaries, because our engineers are demanding, as you know.
Yeah, for sure.
The teams are sort of equally, ahead of the game, and you're always trying to find that extra edge, right? And that starts from what we do, because the clients, the solutions we use empowers the users to access the data to ultimately do their job. So yeah, it's massively evolved, it's complicated, but equally having good partners helps us.
Yeah.
One Password being one of them.
Yeah.
That's been a great addition to the suite of products that we have.
Absolutely, and we talk about the factory here in Milton Keynes. Most of my experience here over the last 10 years has been away at races and in the garage there. But this is the heart of our operation. For everything from all of our design office and engine dyno testing now, and all of these other things that sort of make up the things we do here on campus. What's it like to try and provide this access to all of these different areas of the business and then see it expand and go away to 24 races?
Yeah, so I think my background has always been support. So, we harden our clients and we create all these policies, and we have all these controls, endpoint controls, we add encryption. And anything, I always have empathy by design. And what I mean by that is, there's a lot of factors out there, a lot of risks. And ultimately, we have to mitigate those risks by either these policies, all these solutions. And that's quite, I say simple, it's reasonably simple to do. But the challenging bit is actually, having a device that works for the users.
Yeah.
And actually, we go to nth degree. So we work with engineers. So whenever we have a new product, a new solution, we actually we give it to our engineers and we say, can you simulate a race?
Okay.
And actually, they time what they're doing,
Yeah.
and they actually see, does that new control, that new policy, does it make a difference?
Yeah.
So people don't always appreciate, they get a computer
Yeah.
and they just want it to work. But what they don't realise is actually there's been a lot of man hours, a lot of engineers,
Yeah.
the wider team are actually supporting us in delivering that solution, just to, I suppose, mitigate, problems and risks at the track.
I guess, it's in-house beta testing.
Exactly that, yeah. And it's evolution. It's no different to the car.
Yeah.
The threats are always changing. So, we have to also keep on top of that. So we're always constantly tweaking the policies, and it's going through that cycle, just testing it, yeah.
Because ultimately, security in devices when the team are away at races has to be the same security as we have here at the factory, right?
Exactly that, yeah. So I think for us, anything we design, we're mindful of what we do where we go.
Yep.
So location isn't really a problem.
Okay.
We want to deliver that same experience wherever you are. You could be on the pit wall, you could be in the garage, you could be sitting at your desk in Milton Keynes.
Yeah.
That user experience has to be the same. We have to deliver the same services, and the tools allow us to do that.
Yeah, but also make sure that you have the same confidence in the security
Absolutely.
of that device.
Indeed, yeah.
Indeed, like we often talk about what we do here provides a product to an end user, and ultimately in racing, the driver is the end user and the car is that end product, right? So how do you guard against threats that particularly affect the driver in that way? So whether it be a part that fails or a security system that doesn't allow for the driver to access something he needs to, how do we protect against those particular threats?
So I think testing is a big part, which I just touched on. So we need to have the confidence in the tools that we've got. Yeah. Also, we have a layered approach. So we don't have one control. So it's a number of controls. So it could be anything from encryption to the different controls, to even isolating things. So we have confidence that, heaven forbid, if we did have a breach,
yeah.
You don't necessarily have access to everything. We have all these different layered approaches.
Yeah.
And I think the way I look at it is a computer is almost a gateway to the information to allow the engineers to do what they want.
Yeah.
And that's no different for the drivers. When the race engineers are talking to the drivers, giving them advice, they need to make sure that client is secure. And, the tools and what we provide allows them to do that.
It's about trust. So all of the other engineering tools we use across the business, whether it be results that come from wind tunnels and the tools we use for CAD and results from engine dyno, it's just about knowing that we can trust those before we can really implement them.
Exactly that, yeah. And we're working with all those groups actually with AI capabilities.
Yeah.
And everyone's eager to explore it. But yeah, equally, we need to make sure, it's secure and the output is right, yeah.
Yeah. And, you build this infrastructure, some of it is physical and hardwired into the systems throughout here on campus, but a lot of it, especially when you talk about the car, we have what we refer to as fly-by-wire. I think even small things like our TPMS, our tyre pressure and monitoring system, all of that stuff, it being wireless, does it come with inherent risks or specific things that can be a threat to it?
Absolutely, yeah, especially in that environment, at the track.
Yeah.
There's so many threats, external threats. So, having encryption is key, and having the monitoring tools.
Yep.
And if something isn't right, having the right response and the right team looking at it is paramount, yeah.
Yeah, and are there certain places where there are more issues than others? So I imagine that when we go to a new event, that becomes a whole project in itself and making sure it's all going to function in that place wherever we are in the world. We've also seen over the years there are certain racetracks that tend to throw up little problems. I remember going back to Singapore years ago and all the sensors that they have in the tarmac in Singapore to manage the traffic light systems, and they can be a real problem for some of our systems in the car. And I remember it was like when I first joined in 2015 and we were building these shields for parts in the gearbox because those sensors in the road were really affecting them. Is it a case that when when you go to a new track, you have to be aware that these can be things that crop up that you're not used to?
Absolutely, yeah. So new tracks are notorious for throwing up different things. The weather is a big one for us. We're the hot, humid countries. Some of the places we go to, obviously with cooling our racks, which ultimately empower people is important. And even rain, like the pit wall, when it rains, we have the covers and everything. If we don't get there quick enough, water gets in and introduces issues. So all these different elements absolutely provide.
I tell you what, the cooling system for the racks at the circuit is quite impressive anyway. But what I always used to find was I'd look at a garage plan for somewhere we're going and I'd see that air conditioning unit and it would be right in the engine area, and I just knew I'm in a hot place and now I've got all this heat coming out and just blowing straight into the engine area. I'd be like, IT, come on.
I think it's a balancing act, right? But I think the cooling, as you said, it's now evolved so much. And you've pretty much got an air conditioning system inside the rack now. So it's definitely evolved.
I'm watching IT drain the water out of it on a Sunday night when we're packing up. I'm like, is that safe?
These are all the challenges we have that people don't always see or realise.
You guard some of our most important tools here. Like the simulator is so well guarded that even, I've been here 10 years, I don't have access to the sim. My finger would never let me in there. It's probably for the best. But how are there certain areas of the company where you're just extra guarded about them? You know that if something goes wrong in there, that the ramifications are really, really drastic.
Absolutely, yeah. So simulator is a good example. Also halfway through the season, you have the team looking at the next year. So actually those they're basically in engineering, they form small teams. And that's guarded, obviously, and we have a lot of controls, a lot of reporting. And then as the season goes on, that team becomes larger, that collaboration happens. So it's something that's like super locked down, guarded.
For sure.
In the space of 8 weeks, it could be actually, 3 different teams could have access to it. And keeping on top of that, managing that, auditing it, can be challenging at times. But equally, it's interesting, and that's one of the reasons why I've kind of been here for as long as I have, because I love all these challenges, and and every day is a different day, still learning stuff. But
it is just so important, for anything that a bit of rogue code or something in the sim, and the results that you're getting from it are now not leading you down the correct path, right?
Absolutely, you've seen it up and down the paddock, where people don't have a correlation. And the digital footprint now is so big, from the wind tunnel to the CFD world, and now there's so much reliance on it, especially where time is limited, in terms of how much testing you can do. So all of this plays into that. So there's more testing, more rigor around changes that you make to ensure that you don't introduce something that gives you the wrong results.
And then so then does it sort of come back to a bit of an audit process? Obviously you get these results from the sim, the driver then goes to the track, tells you what he's actually feeling from the car, and then how do you sort of look at the two things and audit what are sort of the important pieces of information from one and what's more important from the other, and I guess finding a middle ground?
I mean, the driver's feedback is ultimately the sort of the true reflection, right? Because if they can't drive the car, if they don't have confidence in the car,
for sure,
you're up against it.
And Max will always tell you. If that's
indeed, and then engineers also equally will tell you when things aren't right. So it's monitoring the changes, what's changed. If it worked at the last event, why isn't it working now? What's been introduced, and going through that logical process, looking at the data, and then hopefully something sort of springs out that it could be this could be the issue, or actually fine-tuning things that it might need more evolution. You've introduced something new, doesn't quite work, trying to understand why it doesn't work, and then implementing changes to rectify it.
So look, Nim, we talk about all these controls, these processes, these procedures that we need to go through, but in many areas, when you start putting these kind of things into place, it can create friction. This is Formula One, and especially when the team are away and working against these deadlines, there's no real room for this friction, is there? It needs to be seamless, essentially. How do we go about that?
I think with experience, you get a good handle on what people are doing, and when we get solutions, not everything fits, not everything's fit for purpose. So I think having that experience, having the understanding of what the business do, what they want, I think plays a big part into that. And also we train a lot of people, so we train our users, best practices, and also the engineers at the track. So if there is a problem, they've got someone to reach out to. and escalate issues.
Yeah.
And I think we've got that network and that support, and I think that's something we find balanced, over the years,
Yeah.
which tends to work quite well. Yeah, and the users aren't shy. When something doesn't work, they'll let you know.
As in when it doesn't work for them,
Absolutely.
they'll soon let you know about it.
And then after every race, we have a report actually. So everything is logged, and we learn. So when there is a problem, we have a sort of a group.
Yeah.
We look at the problem. What caused it? How can we improve it? How can we avoid it happening again? So it's that constant evolution, sort of fine-tuning things and improving.
I've got a question about that later, so we're going to circle back to that. But one of the things that occurs to me, and sort of as you mentioned, we have this whole suite of tools. Different people need different tools for the roles that they do. But how do you sort of manage, the secure data that has to go across all of these different apps and things that we use in our suite of tools?
Yeah, so we have a secure collaboration platform firstly, and we have access control. So, and we have auditing to support that. So I think our job is to make sure the right people have access to the right information, and a combination of those different controls allows us to do that. Yeah.
Ultimately, when you're doing this stuff, you're trying to limit the risk, right? So there's certain things where, there is an inherent risk in people needing things that they need to do their role. Is there ever a thing where you're sort of like, okay, look, we're going to have to, this isn't ideal for us, but we need to make this happen and limit the risk? Is that often a sort of something you
Great
have
question.
to trade off?
Yeah, that happens quite a lot actually, yeah. So we operate on a least privilege approach, meaning kind of what you just described, you need the bare minimum permissions just to do your role.
Yeah.
And for sure, we have, curveballs thrown at us, they want to do something probably outside of that.
Yeah.
And we have a sort of what we call an exception process.
Okay.
So we will give someone the ability to do something for a finite amount of time to allow them to complete that, and then after that it rolls back to that default sort of least privilege approach.
And then I suppose as long as you're aware that that's coming, or there's some sort of process to manage that, then you can do it in time, and you don't introduce friction for that period.
Yeah.
Perfect.
But the world we live in, it's great to have that advance notice, but often it's sort of 11th hour. I need to do this in the next 5 minutes. Can you help? But it's something we're used to. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to talk just quickly about the actual devices themselves. Obviously, I've had plenty of work laptops over the years and work phones and things like that. I want to know, how do you know that you can trust my laptop in a lounge in, an airport in Hong Kong, the same way that you can trust my workstation back here in Milton Keynes? Yeah,
another good question. So the controls we have, there's always a posture assessment. So in order for you to dial in, be it remotely or even here, there's certain criteria that you have to meet. So things like certificates and certain controls and certain policies. Yeah. And if you don't have those sort of the requirements, if you don't hit those requirements, you're not allowed onto the network. Okay. So that's why what we deliver, the solutions we configure, it works anywhere in the world, literally. Yeah.
So ultimately, if I'm sat at a racetrack somewhere with some dodgy Wi-Fi and I can't connect, probably it's something that I've done wrong.
Normally, Callum, right?
For me, for sure, yeah.
But no, it's absolutely, it's happened where people have been at airports, have tried to connect to Wi-Fi's, and then they ring sort of the support service desk, and then when you look, you're like, oh, okay, actually, that hotspot isn't what you think it is. It's been blocked for a reason. Yeah. And I think people appreciate that we're protecting the devices, the company, and the IP, right? That's what we're here for. Yeah.
I mean, I've always been quite lucky, actually, to be fair. As long as you had like lounge access, you'd normally find one of our IT staff in the lounge, and you'd just be like,
tap you on the shoulder.
Just have a little look at this for me, would you mind? And they're like, all right, again. We talk about that, and again, and I have to say, I noticed it from my beginnings here when I joined in 2015, and with the processes that we had to go through to log on in a remote location, and it being a bit of a laborious task. And now I have to say, over the last few years, it almost seems effortless. It just happens in the background, which is great. We talk a lot about now passwordless authentication and pass keys. Now, for someone again who's not necessarily a tech buff, what does that mean? Is it something that we're looking at and implementing? Is that the future?
It's definitely something we're looking at, absolutely, yeah. So you have biometrics, Face ID, fingerprint, so all these different sort of methods.
So I have been sort of doing this already,
absolutely,
just without realising.
Yeah, indeed, yeah. So in the enterprise space, that's absolutely something that you can also introduce to improve that user experience and improve that log-on time. So it's something we're looking at, yeah.
Nice. I want to talk about the threats, because they're ever changing, ever growing. We talk about secure comms and encrypted data, but there's been plenty of examples over the year. I can think back to 2017 when a parts manufacturer was hit by a ransomware and malware attack, and it rippled down the chain. There were teams left in garages at paddocks waiting for parts that couldn't move anywhere, and it was a really big deal. And it was reported at the time that organisation, they'd been dealing with something like 60 million attacks in the months leading up to that. Now that seems like an almost unpicturable number. Is that the norm? Is that something that we're facing constantly?
We absolutely do have these threats, not to that extent, 60 million, but absolutely, yeah. And I think we have an incident response team, so we do get alerts from the various tools and controls we've got, and we actually do look at a lot of the alerts, and the team investigate, what's causing it to avoid that, obviously, that 0-day threat to bring your system down. In addition to that, we work with a lot of vendors, so that there's patching and there's recommendations that we get. Yeah. So we're constantly, mitigating these threats through a combination of those things, yeah.
Because we're not just talking about, I don't know, a kid in his bedroom trying to access, some drawings for the car. You in some cases, you're talking about like big organisations of hacking, and it's profitable.
Yeah, I think recently in the news, there's been some big organisations that absolutely have been massively hit with operations, yeah. So I think we've always taken it seriously, and it's always been at the forefront of our minds. So when we want to bring on partners on board, it's actually to complement what we've got and fit into the ecosystem. Yeah. And one password is another great example of that. They're supporting us. They are making our client that much more secure, but also it's actually the functionality is helping users, because where you can just generate random sort of complex passwords, it saves it, and and then it saves it in a central location. And we have users actually where they've got multiple devices, so because it's saved in a central location, you can jump on any device and it just automatically populates username and password. So all these different things help to secure that.
I mean, and that inherently reduces the friction and helps us find those tiny little gains in performance, because those gains in the garage are still gains. They're gains in the track that translate that extra time you've got to work on the work you're meant to be doing and not just signing in. It's all small gains. We touched on it briefly a minute ago, but what does happen when things do go wrong? So at the circuit, with car parts, things that are physical, we have a really clear process in terms of it starts with quarantine, and then the design office look at and investigate what's gone wrong, and then back to R&D, and then a solution, and then we test that solution before it gets re-implemented back at the circuit. Is that a similar process? Does that translate to your world?
It is, absolutely. A lot of synergy there, yeah. So I talked about an incident response team, and that's exactly what they do. So the first thing we would do is isolate a machine. You want to stop that lateral movement if there is something, malicious on a device, for example. We then look at the logs. How did it happen? What was the user doing? We actually talk to the users in some scenarios. And if it was, for example, someone hit a website, straight away we would block that website to avoid other people. From that, we would look at the actual device and say, can we remediate it, or actually do we need to rebuild the machine? And more often than not, actually, that's what we do. We do actually rebuild machines. Which is a bit of a hit on users, but obviously, if you don't have the confidence that you are actually remediating the problem on that device, there's a risk that when you bring it back to the network and isolate it, it could obviously spread.
Essentially, that's an abundance of caution, but it's hard to sort of stress how imperative it is to take that. When we talk about it at the circuit with those parts, we'll take no risk because you're putting someone's safety at risk, and in your world, ultimately, you're putting an entire network and an organisation at risk by not taking that extra bit of precaution.
Exactly that, and I've had awkward conversations with senior management, as you can imagine, and they were like, he needs to do this or she needs to do this, and I was like, this is where we are, this is the risk. I can't allow it. But as you said, I think people respect that now. I think especially in recently in the news, people have seen worst case scenario, what can happen.
And just touching on it for a moment, is now as well, the cost cap, is that an implication on when you have to think about these things? And I know that's obviously not a trade-off you ever want to have to make, but I know every area of this business, there are, cost cap things that you have to weigh up against what's most
it's funny you
worth
mention that. I do feel like a bit of a bean counter at the moment with cost caps, yeah.
Honestly, you talk to so many people throughout the business, they feel exactly
it's a common
the same.
theme, indeed, yeah. So absolutely, yeah, we have a limited budget.
Yep.
Everyone, all the different parts of the organisation are fighting for that budget,
Yep.
and we're no different, right? So where there's these new threats, where there's new solutions, you want to basically mitigate them. So finding a solution that works, but also you want bang for bucks. Actually, if you've got a product, if you've got a solution that offers multiple sort of different, solutions,
Yeah.
that would be our preference because there's a saving there.
Yeah.
But equally, once you get familiar with the product, once you've got that confidence, you're likely to sort of use it more, yeah.
But yeah, like you said, the efficiency of your suite of tools. So tools like 1Password, they help you manage other areas and things that you can do throughout the business. So they're an efficient tool for us to use in this era.
Yeah, and that is key. So, what 1Password, I think the biggest difference we've seen with that is it has a browser. So when you go to a website, there's actually an extension in the browser. Okay. So you're not actually into a third-party application. So you literally go to a website and you've got this, it's basically it centralizes your password.
Okay.
You go to the username and password and it just auto-populates it. And as simple as that sounds, to your point, the savings we're seeing, but equally, where people are generating passwords, people have a common password and then normally put a 1 on the end when it expires. But actually, with 1Password, they created encrypted, really complex passwords.
Fine.
And people don't have to remember it because it just auto-populates it. So actually, it's a win-win situation, yeah.
It was perfect for me because before I was, I think every time I had to log into a website, I was generating a new password and waiting for that email to reset it.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that you don't really realise in the long run how much time that saves you. So look, we've talked a lot about all of the devices and the network that we have here, but you're also responsible for extending that network to all of our contractors, our vendors. How do you mitigate the risk? Because obviously those contractors and those vendors, they face their own threats. So is there sort of another barrier that you have to sort of create, and again, do so without creating any friction that allows those, third parties to interact with our business, but also keep us safe?
Yeah, again, it's a fine balance. So today, we educate all contractors, to make them aware of our policies, our controls, and why we do it. And a lot of the contractors, they have to use our devices at the moment because to give us that confidence. But actually, with 1Password, we have got an option further down the line where we could potentially allow them to use their devices.
Yeah.
And there's a functionality called device trust within 1Password, and that actually has given us more options, more avenues to explore, allowing other users and having the confidence that actually, is it going to be secure to the level that we want?
Yeah.
And that's something in the future that absolutely we're going to be looking at, yeah. But at the moment, in answer to your question, we have to give them our devices. And that doesn't always go down well because sometimes, a lot of the time, they have their own devices. They have to go to your machine.
I can tell this, I've got 2 laptops on my desk at home.
Right, yeah. So you start having those discussions. So it's a fine balance, but I think we do it for the right reasons.
Well, it's good. So moving on to the future, because obviously we're talking about the future uses of some of these tools. We've talked about today's security and the threats. Obviously, we're coming up to 2026, huge project going on just over the road there at Red Bull Powertrains. Where's this digital garage headed next? I mean, firstly, in terms of its physicality, I guess you'll have some new bits in the garage at the track next year. But then, in terms of the infrastructure, what's the next big thing?
Absolutely, yeah. So a lot of change. The garage is going to look very different next year.
Yeah.
Seen some of the designs, looks very cool, yeah. I think AI, is the key buzzword at the moment, and we're no different in terms of what we're doing. So at the moment, we get alerts and we do things manually. But I think with AI, actually, having, something that actually gets an alert and always makes a recommendation, remedial, that's very much something that we're looking towards.
Okay.
And the tooling that we've got, has the capabilities.
Yeah.
It's still early days, so is it ready for prime time? I think we're just testing it. So, we are sort of looking at the art of the possible in that space, yeah.
And I've seen over the last few years watching Red Bull Advanced Technologies and Red Bull Powertrains grow so quickly. So it must have been a huge task to get all of that part of the infrastructure up and running over the last few years.
Yeah, absolutely. It was pretty much almost setting up a new company, although they're on campus, all new people, new team, new infrastructure. And actually, people, they weren't necessarily used to sort of, the levels that we go to, which is actually quite reassuring because, I think they worked in environments that probably didn't take it as serious as we do. And then, educating them and just saying, they always giving us this request, I can't copy to a USB stick, I can't access this website. And when you start actually going through the motion and explaining why you do it, why actually they can't access it, particular websites. We had a great scenario actually where someone, I think they had a password that wasn't actually secure enough, and they were like, it's not working. And then we were like, look, this is why it's not working. And then we're like, why don't you put it through one password, generate through one password, and then straight away they could get in. And they were like, oh right, didn't know this. I could do it this easily, and then they auto populates it. So it's getting new people in. And making them sort of, or giving them the education, if you like.
I was going to say,
is the challenging part,
I guess it's about bringing them into our security culture, the things that we're also used to. And I always have this when I talk to people about my life, in the pit lane, and I'll explain stuff to them, and they say to me, oh, it's just completely foreign. I guess if people are just not used to it, it just takes a minute to get them used to it.
Yeah, and we just try to have the same synergy between all the different sort of Red Bull technology groups. Which helps us to do that.
So ultimately, when we talk about your role in that end user experience, that has a huge impact on the efficiency of what we do. So is that like a large part of what you're looking at? In Formula One, it's all about efficiency, isn't it? Efficiency in how you spend, how you manage, how you plan. All of those things are efficiency based to gain performance. So is that essentially where the end user experience has like a really big impact?
It does, because as I touched on earlier, all these controls policies, they all leave a footprint on the device. And you want to reduce you want to reduce the agents you've got on the device to make sure you've got that performance. And working closely with our engineers, having that testing process that I discussed earlier helps us give that efficiency and performance. Because people don't necessarily always realize that. They just get a device and they was thinking, on my personal device it's a lot quicker, I can do this, and naturally a corporate device with all our tools, it's going to have that performance degradation. But working with the team, with the software developers, with the engineers, how they work, and actually fine-tuning things is absolutely a big part of what we do.
So look, just briefly, we've talked a lot about all of our tools, all of the things you do. Now, for us out at the racetrack, the spotlight is on us on a Sunday. It's on us and on the drivers and on the car and people in the garage and the pit crew. How do you get to sort of look at your own performance? How do you get to view it and say, you know what, I've done a good job at that? Because, it's a really important thing, like feeling rewarded in your work. And I feel like sometimes, a lot of, like yourself and some of the other departments, you are the silent heroes of all this. Because, I know for a fact, having to have used all this suite of stuff that we have for so long, that when it does go wrong, it does take a massive impact. But when it goes right, you don't seem to always get the credit you deserve. So how do you make that judgment for yourself about you?
I suppose a secure, reliable and good user experience is a good race day for me, because that event report I talked about, I'll come in on a Monday and sometimes it's like 3 pages. You're like, oh my gosh, what's gone wrong here, right? But more often than not, actually, it's half a page. And for us, that's success, empowering the users to do what they want, to deliver that success at the track. We're all one team at the end of the day, and we're all at the same goal. And I think, as you said, we play a huge part into that.
So a report that has like 2 or 3 lines on it, you're like, this was a good week.
Absolutely, yeah.
I feel the same. I remember when I wrote my book and it had just gone through legal, and obviously I was super nervous about getting this report back. And it came back and there were like 6 lines on it, and they were like 1 sentence changes. I was like, yes. Come on, that's a great effort. Mate, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. It's been a real pleasure, and I feel like I understand all of this a little bit better. I feel like it's quite nice to sort of try and get an insight on things that I've been doing and not necessarily knowing have been going on. So thank you so much for taking the time, mate. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.